3 months after our divorce, my ex-mother-in-law called me. Her voice was shaking as she said, "Your husband is in the ER. It's an emergency. Bring $100,000 immediately." I couldn't stop myself from laughing and replied, "I'm sorry, who are you talking about?" But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The morning Lena Whitlock decided to leave her husband, the sky over southern Illinois hung pale and indifferent, stretched thin across the horizon like old linen. She stood in the bathroom of the house she'd lived in for 8 years, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked back at her with the same tired eyes she'd grown accustomed to, brown and watchful, always scanning for danger in the mundane. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that felt like held breath. She could hear Bryce downstairs, moving through the kitchen with his usual morning routine. Coffee maker hissing, cabinet doors opening and closing with deliberate care. He was a man of patterns, and patterns meant control. Everything had its place in Bryce Whitlock's world, including his wife. Lena ran cold water over her hands, letting the shock of it wake something in her that had been sleeping too long. The porcelain sink was clean, spotless actually, because Gloria had inspected it 2 days ago during one of her unannounced visits. Lena could still hear her mother-in-law's voice, sharp as a blade wrapped in cotton. "You really ought to use bleach more often, dear. A clean home reflects a clean heart." Lena dried her hands on a towel embroidered with their initials, a wedding gift from someone whose name she couldn't remember anymore. The letters were intertwined, B and L, tangled together like they were supposed to mean something permanent. She folded the towel precisely and placed it back on the rack. Even now, even with what she was about to do, her hands moved through the rituals of obedience. Downstairs, Bryce called her name. "Lena, you coming down?" His voice was pleasant. That was the thing people never understood when she tried to explain it later. Bryce wasn't a monster in the obvious ways. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He went to church every Sunday and shook hands with the pastor and smiled at neighbors like a man who had everything figured out. From the outside, Bryce Whitlock looked like the kind of husband women were supposed to want. Stable, employed, present. It was inside the house where the measurements started. Inside the house where every dollar was accounted for, every minute explained, every conversation monitored like she was a suspect rather than a partner. She descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking under her weight. The house was old, one of those river town colonials with good bones and bad wiring. They'd bought it together, though Bryce had handled all the paperwork. His name on the deed, his name on the mortgage, his decision. "You don't need to worry about all that," he told her, smiling. "I'll take care of everything." And he had. He'd taken care of everything until there was nothing left for her to take care of herself. Bryce stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He'd already made hers the way he thought she should drink it. 1 sugar, splash of milk. Never mind that she preferred it black. He'd decided years ago that black coffee was too harsh for women, and that had been the end of that conversation. "Morning," he said, sliding the mug toward her. "You were up there a while. Everything okay?" "Fine," Lena said. She wrapped her hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep through ceramic into her palms. The kitchen smelled like coffee and something else, something stale, maybe the faint residue of last night's tension, still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. Bryce studied her face. He had pale blue eyes that could look kind when he wanted them to, and right now he wanted them to. He was handsome in the way that men from good families often were. Neat hair, clean jaw, straight teeth. Nothing excessive. Nothing that would draw unwanted attention. "You seem distant lately," he said. Lena sipped her coffee. "Too sweet. I'm tired. Maybe you should cut back on your hours." She worked part-time at a bookstore near Carlisle Lake, shelving novels and ringing up customers who came in smelling like boat fuel and summer. It was the only space that felt like hers. and even that was on borrowed time. Bryce had been suggesting for months that she quit. Too much driving, too much time away, too much independence disguised as concern. "I like my job," Lena said. "I know you do." Bryce's voice was gentle, reasonable. "But you're running yourself down. You're not sleeping well. You're stressed. Maybe it's time to focus on us. On the house. On building something real here. Building something real. Code for, stay home where I can see you." Lena set her mug down on the counter. She could feel the weight of 8 years pressing against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. 8 years of explaining herself. 8 years of budgets she didn't control and decisions she didn't make, and a life that felt like someone else's badly written script. "I'm going to be late," she said. Bryce reached out and touched her arm. Not rough. Never rough where anyone could see marks. Just firm enough to stop her movement. Firm enough to remind her who decided when conversations were over. "Lena," he said, "talk to me." She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. She'd learned to read the small shifts in his expression. The tightness around his mouth, the slight narrowing of his eyes. He was worried. Not about her. About his control slipping. "There's nothing to talk about," she said. She pulled her arm back, gently, carefully, the way you'd extract yourself from a trap without triggering it. Bryce let her go, but his expression changed. The kindness drained out of his eyes, replaced by something colder. "You're lying to me," he said. "I'm going to work." "Who were you texting last night?" There it was. The real question. The one he'd been holding since she came to bed and turned her back to him without saying good night. "A friend from the bookstore," Lena said. "About scheduling." "Let me see your phone." No. The word came out harder than she'd intended. Bryce stared at her, and for a moment the kitchen felt very small, the walls pressing in like the air was being sucked out of the room. "Excuse me," he said. "I said no." She'd never said no before. Not like this. Not flat and final and without apology. Bryce took a step toward her. "We're married. We don't keep secrets." "Everyone keeps secrets," Lena said, "even from their spouses." "Not us." "Especially us." She could see him processing this, trying to fit it into his understanding of how their relationship worked. In his mind, they had rules. Unspoken rules that had been established over years of careful erosion. Each boundary pushed a little further until there were no boundaries left. Just a vast open space where he roamed freely and she stayed contained. "You're acting crazy," Bryce said. His voice had gone quiet now, which was worse than yelling. "I think you need to sit down and calm down before you say something you'll regret." Lena picked up her purse from the chair where she'd left it the night before. Her keys were inside, along with her phone and her wallet and a small notebook where she'd been writing things down for months. Dates, times, quotes, evidence, though she hadn't named it that yet. "I have to go," she said. "Lena." But she was already moving toward the door, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Bryce followed her, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you." She reached for the doorknob. His hand came down on top of hers, not grabbing, just covering it, preventing her from turning it. She could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive that his mother bought him every Christmas. "Move your hand," Lena said. "Not until you explain to me what's going on. Move. Your hand." They stood there, frozen in a moment that felt like it could tip either way, toward violence or toward surrender. Lena could feel the heat of his palm pressed against the back of her hand, could hear his breathing change, quicken, the way it did when he was deciding whether to push further. Then she did something she'd never done before. She screamed. Not words, just sound, raw and loud and completely unexpected. Bryce jerked back like he'd been shocked, and in that second of stunned confusion, Lena twisted the knob and yanked the door open and stepped out into the pale morning light. She didn't run. Running would have given him permission to chase. Instead, she walked to her car with deliberate, measured steps, unlocked it, got inside and started the engine. Through the windshield, she could see Bryce standing in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. She put the car in reverse and backed down the driveway without looking at him again. The drive to the bookstore took 15 minutes, but Lena didn't go to the bookstore. Instead, she drove to Carlisle Lake and parked in one of the empty lots that faced the water. The lake stretched out before her, dark and rippled by wind. There were no boats this early, no fishermen casting lines from the shore, just water and sky and the sound of her own breathing. She sat in the car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd defied him. She'd said no. She'd walked out, and the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. She was still breathing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Bryce. "We need to talk about your behavior. This isn't acceptable." Another buzz. Another text. "My mother is coming over for lunch. You need to be home by noon." Lena stared the messages, feeling something cold and clear crystallize inside her chest. For 8 years, she'd read texts like this and responded with apologies, with explanations, with promises to do better. She'd bent herself into shapes that fit his expectations, had worn herself down trying to be the wife he'd decided she should be. She deleted both messages without responding. Then she called her boss at the bookstore and told her she wouldn't be in today. She called her bank, the one account Bryce didn't know about, the one she'd opened secretly 6 months ago with cash from selling old jewelry, and asked about their hours. Then she sat in the car and watched the water move and made a plan. The next 3 months were a study in precision. Lena didn't announce she was leaving. She didn't have a dramatic confrontation or pack her bags while Bryce was at work. Instead, she became very, very quiet. She smiled when he expected her to smile. She nodded when he expected her to nod. She apologized for her outburst and went back to the routines that made him feel safe. And while she did all of this, she documented everything. Every time Bryce checked her phone, she wrote it down. Date, time, what he was looking for. Every time Gloria showed up unannounced and went through her cabinets or made comments about her weight or asked why the house wasn't clean enough, she wrote that down too. Every time Bryce controlled her spending, questioned her whereabouts, grabbed her wrist a little too hard during an argument, she recorded it all in a small notebook she kept hidden in her car. She took photos, not of bruises, because Bryce was too careful for that, but of texts, of credit card statements that showed how he monitored every purchase, of emails from Gloria offering advice on how to be a better wife, evidence of a cage that left no visible marks. She met with a lawyer in the next county over, someone who didn't know Bryce or his family, someone who listened to her story without judgment. The lawyer was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she'd looked at Lena across a scarred wooden desk and said, "You need to be smart about this. Men like your husband don't let go easily." "I know," Lena had said, "and his mother will make it worse." "I know that too." The lawyer had nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure you're protected." They filed the papers on a Thursday morning in early spring. Lena signed her name on documents that would legally dissolve her marriage, and when she walked out of the lawyer's office, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not happy, not yet, but unburdened, like she'd finally set down something heavy she'd been carrying too long. Bryce was served at his office. He called her 17 times that afternoon. She didn't answer any of them. Gloria called next. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice shrill with outrage. "What have you done to my son?" "I filed for divorce," Lena said calmly. "The papers are clear. You can't do this. You're his wife. You made vows. And he broke them. He's been nothing but good to you." "Gloria!" Lena interrupted, her voice flat. "I'm done talking about this. If you want to discuss the divorce, contact my lawyer." She hung up before Gloria could respond. The harassment started immediately. Texts from Bryce, from Gloria, from family friends who'd been told carefully curated versions of the story. Messages about duty and loyalty, and what people would think. Voicemails that started with concern and ended with threats disguised as warnings. Lena blocked their numbers and kept going. The divorce was finalized on a hot day in July. The courtroom was small and stuffy, smelling of old carpet and furniture polish. Bryce sat on one side with his lawyer, his face carefully neutral. He'd lost weight. He looked tired. A small, petty part of Lena felt satisfaction at that. The judge reviewed the terms. No shared assets. Lena had brought nothing into the marriage and wanted nothing from it. No alimony. No contact order unless absolutely necessary. Clean break. "Do you understand and agree to these terms, Mr. Whitlock?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Bryce said. His voice was strained. "Ms. Whitlock." "Yes, Your Honor." The gavel came down. Just like that, 8 years dissolved into paperwork and signatures. Lena walked out of the courthouse alone. She'd parked on a side street where no one would see her car. The summer heat hit her like a wall. Thick and humid, but she didn't care. She sat in the driver's seat and let herself cry for the first time since she'd left. Not because she was sad, because she was free. She moved into a small rental house near the lake the following week. It was tiny, just a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen with old appliances and counters that had seen better days. But it was hers. She could drink her coffee black. She could leave dishes in the sink overnight. She could come and go without explaining herself to anyone. She'd never slept better in her life. For 2 months, Lena existed in a state of careful peace. She worked at the bookstore. She took walks by the lake in the evenings. She read books she'd been meaning to read for years. She learned to be alone without being lonely, learned to recognize the difference between solitude and isolation. And then Gloria called. It was a Thursday evening in late September. The air had finally cooled, carrying the first hints of autumn. Lena had made herself dinner, pasta with vegetables, simple and satisfying, and was washing dishes when her phone rang. She'd unblocked Gloria's number a month ago, figuring enough time had passed that the harassment would have stopped. She should have known better. "Lena." Gloria's voice was different, shaky, tearful. "Lena, please don't hang up." Lena dried her hands on a towel. "What do you want, Gloria?" "It's Bryce. He's in the hospital." Something cold tightened in Lena's stomach. "What happened?" "He's sick. Very sick. The doctors," Gloria's voice cracked. "The doctors say he needs treatment. Expensive treatment. And I don't have the money." Lena pressed the phone against her ear, staring out the kitchen window at the darkening sky. She could hear the manipulation in Gloria's voice, the calculated breaks and pauses designed to elicit sympathy. "I'm sorry he's sick," Lena said carefully, "but I'm not his wife anymore. You were married to him for 8 years. And now I'm not. Lena, please." Gloria was crying now, or pretending to cry. It was hard to tell with her. "You have to help. He needs $100,000 for the treatment." Lena actually laughed. The sound surprised her, sharp and bitter in the quiet kitchen. $100,000. "Yes, I know it's a lot, but—" "Gloria, I don't have that kind of money. Even if I did, I wouldn't." "You have savings. You have that job. You could get a loan." "No. Lena." "I said no. I'm not his wife. I'm not responsible for his medical bills. I'm not your bank." The crying stopped abruptly. When Gloria spoke again, her voice was hard as stone. "You owe us," she said, "after everything we did for you. After we took you in when you had nothing. You owe my son." "I don't owe you anything." "You're heartless. You know that. Heartless and selfish. What kind of woman abandons a man when he's sick?" "The kind who knows the difference between sickness and manipulation," Lena said. "Goodbye, Gloria." She ended the call and set the phone down on the counter. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline coursing through her body like electricity. She'd expected anger. She'd expected guilt trips. But $100,000? That was ambitious, even for Gloria. Lena finished washing the dishes, dried them, put them away. Normal tasks. Grounding tasks. By the time she was done, her hands had stopped shaking. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the small porch that overlooked the lake. The water was dark now, almost black, reflecting nothing but the faint lights from houses on the opposite shore. Somewhere out there, a boat engine hummed, low and distant. Lena sipped her wine and waited for the guilt to come. It didn't. The messages started the next morning. Lena woke to find her phone filled with texts, voicemails, and missed calls. All from Gloria. She lay in bed, the early light streaming through thin curtains, and scrolled through them with a growing sense of dread. The first text was a photo. Bryce in a hospital bed, looking pale and thin. Tubes running from his arm to an four stand. His eyes were closed, his face slack with exhaustion or medication or both. The caption read, "This is what you've done to him." The next message was longer, a wall of text about responsibility and family and Christian duty. About how Lena had promised to stand by Bryce in sickness and in health, and how divorce didn't erase moral obligations. Then another photo. This one showed what appeared to be a medical bill. The numbers blurred, but the total visible. $94,673.82. This is just the beginning. Gloria had written, "He needs ongoing treatment. You need to do the right thing." Lena set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the soft tick of the clock in the kitchen and the distant cry of birds outside. She could feel the old familiar weight trying to settle back onto her shoulders. The weight of other people's expectations, their demands, their insistence that she sacrifice herself to make them comfortable. But something had changed in her, something fundamental. The woman who would have rushed to help, who would have felt crushing guilt at the sight of Bryce in that hospital bed, no longer existed. That woman had died in the marriage, worn down piece by piece until there was nothing left. The woman who remained was harder, clearer. She saw manipulation for what it was. Lena got out of bed, made coffee, and started her day. She didn't respond to any of Gloria's messages. Over the next week, the campaign intensified. Gloria sent photos every day. Bryce in the hospital, Bryce with doctors, Bryce looking weak and vulnerable. A stark contrast to the controlling man Lena had lived with for 8 years. Each photo came with a message designed to wound. A real woman wouldn't do this. You left him when he was weakest. God is watching. People in this town will know what kind of person you are. There were voicemails, too. Gloria's voice alternating between crying and rage, sometimes within the same message. She talked about how Lena had used Bryce, had taken advantage of his kindness, had trapped him in a marriage, and then abandoned him when things got hard. The narrative was complete fiction, but it was told with such conviction that Lena wondered if Gloria actually believed it. The worst message came on day 6. "I hope you can sleep at night," Gloria said, her voice thick with theatrical sorrow. "I hope you can look at yourself in the mirror. Because my son is dying, Lena. He's dying, and you could save him, but you're choosing not to. That's murder in God's eyes. Murder. And you'll answer for it." Lena listened to the message twice, her coffee going cold in her hand. Then she saved it, along with all the others. She didn't know why yet, just that some instinct told her to keep everything. At work, the harassment followed her. Gloria called the bookstore 3 times in one day, asking to speak with Lena. The owner, a patient woman named Rita, who'd known Lena for years, finally came to her during a lull. "I don't know what's going on with you and your ex's family," Rita said gently, "but if you need to take some time off, or if you need me to tell them to stop calling—" "Tell them I'm not here," Lena said. "Tell them I don't work here anymore. Tell them whatever you want." Rita nodded slowly. "Are you okay? Really?" "I'm fine," Lena said. And she meant it. She was fine. Better than fine. Because this time she knew the game. She recognized the tactics. And she refused to play. 2 weeks after the first phone call, a letter arrived. Lena found it in her mailbox when she came home from work, a thick envelope with an official-looking return address. She carried it inside, set her bag down, and opened it standing in the middle of her small living room. Notice of civil complaint. The words swam before her eyes. She read them once, then again, slowly making sure she understood. Gloria Whitlock was suing her. The claim was detailed, almost impressively thorough in its fabrication. It stated that Lena had controlled the finances during the marriage, that she had prevented Bryce from seeking proper medical care for an ongoing condition, and that she had abandoned him when he became seriously ill, leaving him financially destitute and unable to afford necessary treatment. The amount demanded, $100,000 plus legal fees. Lena sat down on her couch, the papers spread across her lap. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. This was beyond harassment. This was a calculated attack, designed to force her into either paying or fighting in a public forum where Gloria could continue to paint her as a villain. She read through the complaint carefully, noting each lie, each distortion of reality. According to Gloria's lawsuit, Lena had been the dominant partner in the marriage, controlling and manipulative. She had isolated Bryce from his family, had spent money recklessly while refusing to let him have access to their accounts, and had left him the moment he became a burden. It was a perfect inversion of the truth, and it was terrifying, not because Lena believed she would lose, the claims were provably false, but because defending herself would mean exposing everything, going back to court, facing Bryce and Gloria again, making private pain public. She set the papers down and walked to the kitchen, poured herself water, drank it slowly. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful and indifferent, Lena had told herself she was done with them, that the divorce was a clean ending, a closed chapter. She'd been naive to think it would be that simple. Men like Bryce and women like Gloria didn't release control easily. They held on until their fingers bled. She called her lawyer that evening. "I received a lawsuit," Lena said without preamble, "from Gloria Whitlock, my ex-husband's mother." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see. Can you scan and email me the documents?" "Yes, but I need to know, can she actually win this?" "Based on what you've told me about your marriage?" "No, but she can make the process expensive and exhausting. That's often the point of these things. They're not trying to win. They're trying to punish you for leaving." Lena closed her eyes. "So what do I do?" "You defend yourself. You document everything, which I'm guessing you've already been doing. And you prepare to fight." "I don't want to fight." "I know." The lawyer's voice was kind but firm. "But sometimes fighting is the only way to end the war." After they hung up, Lena sat in the gathering darkness of her living room and thought about what the lawyer had said. Fighting meant reliving the marriage. It meant standing in a courtroom and explaining how she'd been controlled, diminished, erased over 8 years. It meant giving voice to humiliations she'd barely acknowledged to herself. But it also meant something else. It meant refusing to be silenced. Refusing to pay for the crime of saving herself. Lena stood up and walked to her bedroom. In the back of her closet, behind winter coats and boxes of books, was a small fireproof safe. She'd bought it 2 years ago, back when she'd first started understanding that she might need to escape. Inside were copies of documents, printed emails, USB drives containing photos and texts. A record of the marriage that Bryce and Gloria wanted erased. She pulled the safe out and set on her bed, opened it with the combination she'd never shared with anyone. Inside, organized in labeled folders, was everything she needed. Bank statements showing joint accounts she'd had no access to. Text messages from Bryce demanding to know where she was, who she was with, what she was spending money on. Photos of her wrist after the night he'd grabbed it hard enough to leave fingerprints. Emails from Gloria, hundreds of them, filled with criticism and control masked as concern. And recordings, audio files saved on her phone from arguments where Bryce had said things he'd later deny, where Gloria had revealed the truth behind her manipulations. Lena had kept it all, not for revenge. She'd never wanted revenge, but because some part of her had known she'd need proof. That one day, someone would try to rewrite the story, and she'd need evidence to defend the truth. That day had come. She spent the next several hours organizing everything, making copies, preparing files to send to her lawyer. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. Her back ached from sitting. Her eyes burned from staring at screens and papers. But she felt clear, purposeful, ready. If Gloria wanted a fight, Lena would give her one. But it would be on Lena's terms, with Lena's truth, spoken in a voice that had been silent far too long. She sent everything to her lawyer with a brief email. This is what they don't want anyone to see. Then she went to bed and slept without dreaming. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. During those weeks, Lena lived in a strange state of limbo. She went to work, came home prepared for the trial. Her lawyer reviewed everything she'd provided and called it damning evidence, which should have been reassuring but mostly just felt exhausting. Gloria continued to send messages, though less frequently now. The photos stopped, replaced by texts that veered between self-righteous anger and maudlin pleas. Bryce sent nothing directly, but Lena heard through mutual acquaintances that he was devastated by the lawsuit, that he'd had no idea his mother had filed it, that he just wanted everyone to move on with their lives. Lies, all of it. Bryce knew. He'd always known what his mother was capable of, had always tacitly approved of her interventions. That was how they worked. Gloria acted and Bryce claimed innocence. 3 days before the court date, Lena received one final message from Gloria. You still have time to do the right thing. Drop the defense. Pay what you owe, and we'll forget this ever happened. But if you fight us in court, everyone in this town will know what kind of person you really are. Your name will be ruined. Is that really what you want? Lena read the message twice, then typed a response she'd been composing in her head for weeks. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. See you in court. She sent it and immediately blocked Gloria's number. For good this time. The night before the trial, Lena laid out her clothes. Simple black pants, a white blouse, minimal jewelry. Professional, unintimidating. The kind of outfit that said she had nothing to hide. She reviewed her notes one final time, reading through the timeline she'd constructed of the marriage, the divorce, and everything that came after. She thought about calling someone, a friend, maybe, or her sister who lived 3 states away. Someone to talk to ease the nerves that were starting to build despite her outward calm. But in the end, she didn't call anyone. She'd learned to sit with her own thoughts, to trust her own judgment. That was what freedom meant, not needing someone else's validation to know she was making the right choice. She went to bed early and woke before dawn, made coffee, ate toast she could barely taste, drove to the courthouse through empty streets as the sun rose pale and cold over southern Illinois. The building was old, built sometime in the early 1900s, all red brick and white columns. Inside, it smelled like dust and floor wax and accumulated decades of other people's conflicts. Lena walked through the metal detector, signed in at the desk, and took the stairs to the 2nd floor where civil cases were heard. Her lawyer was waiting outside the courtroom, a leather briefcase at her feet and a confident expression on her face. Ready, she asked. Lena nodded. Ready. The courtroom was smaller than Lena had expected. She'd been imagining something grand, dramatic, high ceilings and ornate woodwork, like courtrooms in movies. Instead, it was practical and worn, with fluorescent lights that hummed faintly and air conditioning that couldn't quite keep up with the late September warmth. There were maybe 30 seats for observers, half of them empty. Bryce sat at the defendant's table with Gloria beside him, both dressed conservatively. Bryce wore a dark suit that hung looser than Lena remembered. He really had lost weight. Gloria wore a navy dress and pearls, her hair styled in the same careful waves she'd worn for as long as Lena had known her. They looked respectable, sympathetic, exactly the image they'd always cultivated. Gloria saw Lena first. Her expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: anger, satisfaction, something that might have been uncertainty. Then she leaned over and whispered to Bryce, who turned to look. For the first time since the divorce, Lena met her ex-husband's eyes directly. He looked away first. That small victory carried Lena to her seat. Her lawyer sat beside her, arranging papers with practiced efficiency. On the other side of the aisle, Gloria's lawyer, a heavy-set man with gray hair and an expensive watch, did the same. All rise. The judge entered, and everyone stood. She was a woman in her 60s, wearing reading glasses on a chain and an expression of professional neutrality that came from years of hearing people's worst problems. She settled into her chair, reviewed something on her desk, and then looked up at both parties. This is the case of Whitlock versus Whitlock. I've reviewed the complaint and the response. Ms. Whitlock, Gloria Whitlock, you're claiming that the defendant, Lena Whitlock, owes you $100,000 in medical expenses for your son, based on financial control and abandonment during the marriage. Is that correct? Gloria stood. Yes, Your Honor. And Ms. Whitlock, Lena Whitlock, you're denying these claims and stating that you were not financially in control during the marriage, and that the divorce was finalized months ago with no ongoing obligations. Correct. Lena stood. Yes, Your Honor. All right, let's proceed. Ms. Whitlock, Gloria, you may begin. Gloria's lawyer stood and launched into his opening statement. He painted a picture of a devoted son, a loving family, and a woman who'd manipulated them all. According to him, Lena had insisted on keeping separate finances, had refused to let Bryce access joint accounts, and had left him the moment he became ill, taking with her money that should have been used for his care. It was a compelling narrative, built on carefully selected half-truths. Yes, Lena had opened a separate account, but only after years of having no financial autonomy. Yes, she'd left when Bryce became ill, but the illness had nothing to do with why she'd left, and Gloria knew it. Lena listened without reacting. Her lawyer had coached her on this. Show no emotion. Don't give them ammunition. Let the evidence speak. When it was their turn, Lena's lawyer stood and spoke in a calm, measured tone that cut through the room like a blade through water. Your Honor, this lawsuit is not about medical bills or abandoned obligations. It's about control. For 8 years, my client endured financial, emotional, and psychological abuse at the hands of her then-husband, with the full support of his mother, Gloria Whitlock. When she finally gathered the courage to leave and divorce him, they continued to harass her, demanding money she doesn't owe and claiming responsibility she doesn't have. This lawsuit is simply another form of that harassment, and we have extensive documentation to prove it. She let that hang in the air for a moment, then continued. We will show that Lena Whitlock had no control over the finances during her marriage. We will show that she documented abuse and manipulation. And we will show that this claim for $100,000 is not based in reality, but in a desire to punish her for leaving an abusive situation. Gloria's face went red. She started to stand, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm, stopping her. The judge made a note on her pad. All right, let's hear your evidence. Ms. Gloria Whitlock, you're first. Gloria took the stand. She swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Then she told a story that was so far from reality, it would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. She described Lena as cold, calculating, someone who'd trapped Bryce in a marriage he'd been too kind to escape from. She talked about how Lena had refused to let Gloria visit, had kept Bryce isolated from his family, had spent money on herself while denying Bryce basic necessities. She controlled everything, Gloria said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The money, the house, his whole life. And when he got sick and needed her most, she abandoned him, just walked away like 8 years meant nothing. And you believe she should be financially responsible for his medical care? Gloria's lawyer asked. Absolutely. She was his wife. She made vows. You don't just walk away from someone when they're suffering. Lena's lawyer stood for cross-examination. She was smiling slightly, which Lena had learned meant she was about to dismantle someone's testimony. Mrs. Whitlock, you say Lena controlled the finances during the marriage. Do you have any evidence of this? I saw it with my own eyes. Evidence, Mrs. Whitlock. Bank statements, for example. Documents showing accounts in Lena's name that excluded your son. Gloria hesitated. Well, I don't have physical documents, but Bryce told me. So you don't have evidence. You have hearsay. The lawyer flipped through papers. In fact, I have bank statements here showing that all joint accounts during the marriage were in Bryce Whitlock's name only, with Lena listed as an authorized user, meaning she could access the accounts, but had no primary control. Would you like to see them? Gloria's mouth tightened. I'm sure there's an explanation. I'm sure there is too, but it directly contradicts your testimony. The lawyer moved on smoothly. You also claim that Lena kept her son isolated from family. How often did you visit their home during the marriage? Well, I tried to visit often, but she made it difficult. How often, Mrs. Whitlock? 2 or 3 times a week. 2 or 3 times a week. For 8 years. That doesn't sound like isolation to me. Gloria flushed. She made me feel unwelcome. Did she ever tell you not to come? Not in so many words, but her attitude. So that's a no. Did she ever prevent you from speaking to your son? No, but... Thank you, Mrs. Whitlock. No further questions. Gloria stepped down, her composure cracking. She glared at Lena as she returned to her seat, and Lena met her gaze evenly without flinching. Next was Bryce. He walked to the stand slowly like it pained him. Maybe it did. Lena didn't know what was actually wrong with him, if anything. He could be genuinely sick, or this could all be theater. With Bryce, it was hard to tell. He'd always been good at performing vulnerability when it served him. He swore in and sat down. Wouldn't look at Lena. Kept his eyes on his lawyer instead. Mr. Whitlock, can you tell us about your marriage to Lena? Bryce cleared his throat. It was difficult. From the start, really. She had trust issues. Wouldn't let me help with money. Wouldn't let me make decisions about the house. Everything had to go through her. Lena felt her lawyer's hand on her arm, a gentle reminder to stay calm, stay neutral. And when you became ill, his lawyer prompted. She left. Just left. I was in the hospital, scared, and she filed for divorce. I didn't even know she was planning it. His voice cracked slightly. I thought we could work through things, but she'd already decided she was done. Did she offer to help with medical expenses? No. She cut off all contact. Lena's lawyer stood for cross-examination. She looked almost bored, which Lena suspected was deliberate. Mr. Whitlock, when exactly were you hospitalized? August. Last year. And when did Lena file for divorce? April. Before I got sick. So the divorce was filed 4 months before your hospitalization, meaning she didn't leave because you got sick. She left, the marriage ended, and then months later you became ill. Is that accurate? Bryce shifted in his seat. It was all connected. Please answer yes or no. Did she file for divorce before or after you were hospitalized? Before. Thank you. Now, you testified that she controlled the finances. Can you provide any documentation of accounts that were solely in her name, or any evidence that you were denied access to marital funds? She had her ways. Evidence, Mr. Whitlock. I don't have physical evidence, no. So you're asking this court to believe, without evidence, that your ex-wife controlled money she had no legal access to, and that she should now pay for medical expenses that occurred months after your divorce was finalized. Have I summarized that correctly? Bryce didn't answer. His jaw was tight, and Lena could see the anger building behind his eyes, the same anger she'd lived with for 8 years, carefully hidden from the world. Mr. Whitlock, the lawyer pressed. She made my life hell. he said suddenly, his voice rising. Every day was walking on eggshells, trying not to upset her, trying to keep her happy. That's not what I asked. She took everything from me. My dignity, my confidence, my health. And now, she won't even help when I need her most. Your Honor, Lena's lawyer said calmly, the witness is not answering the question. Mr. Whitlock, the judge said, her voice sharp, answer the question that was asked or step down. Bryce stopped talking, took a breath. No, I don't have physical evidence. No further questions, Lena's lawyer said. Bryce returned to his seat. He looked deflated, smaller somehow. Gloria immediately leaned over and whispered to him, probably trying to shore up his story, but the damage was done. Without evidence, without documentation, their entire case rested on emotional appeals and accusations. Then it was Lena's turn. She stood and walked to the witness stand on legs that felt steadier than she'd expected, raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, sat down, and finally looked directly at the judge. Ms. Whitlock, her lawyer began, can you describe the financial arrangement in your marriage? Lena's voice was clear and steady. Bryce controlled everything. All accounts were in his name. I had access as an authorized user, but I couldn't make decisions without his approval. He reviewed every purchase I made, questioned every expense, and if he didn't approve of how I spent money, he'd restrict my access. Did you have your own money? I worked part-time, but my paychecks went into the joint account. I didn't have a separate account until the last year of the marriage, which I opened secretly because I was planning to leave. Why did you open it secretly? Because I knew if Bryce found out, he'd either force me to close it or find a way to control it. He didn't believe in me having financial independence. Can you describe his reaction to normal, everyday decisions you wanted to make? Lena took a breath. This was the part she'd been dreading, making private pain public. But it needed to be said. If I bought something without asking, even something small like a book or lunch with a friend, he'd accuse me of hiding things from him. He'd go through my phone, check my bank transactions, ask detailed questions about where I'd been and who I'd seen. If my answers didn't satisfy him, he'd be angry for days. Silent treatment. Accusations. Sometimes he'd. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes he'd physically prevent me from leaving a room until I explained myself to his satisfaction. Did his mother participate in this control? Yes. Gloria visited constantly, multiple times a week. She'd go through our cabinets, our closets, criticize how I kept the house or dressed or spent money. She reinforced everything Bryce did, told me I needed to be more obedient, more grateful. She treated me like I was a problem that needed to be managed, not a person. Why did you stay for 8 years? It was the question everyone asked, and Lena still didn't have a simple answer. Because it happened gradually. Small things at first. Little requests that seemed reasonable. Questions about my day that felt like concern. It wasn't until years in that I realized I'd been slowly erased. By then, I'd convinced myself that this was normal, or that I was the problem, or that I couldn't survive on my own. It took a long time to understand that I was in an abusive relationship, even though there were no visible bruises. Gloria's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He approached with the confidence of someone who thought he could break her story. Ms. Whitlock, these are serious accusations. Do you have any proof of this alleged abuse? Yes. She saw surprise flash across his face. He'd been expecting her to say no, to rely on testimony alone. What kind of proof? Text messages, emails, photos, audio recordings. 8 years' worth. He paused, recalibrating. I see. And you kept all of this why? If things were so terrible, why document instead of leaving sooner? Because I knew one day someone would try to rewrite the story, Lena said quietly. I knew that if I left without proof, people wouldn't believe me. Men like Bryce and women like Gloria, are very good at appearing normal. So I documented the truth. Isn't it possible you're misinterpreting concern as control? That your ex-husband was simply trying to be a responsible partner? No. How can you be certain? Because responsible partners don't go through your phone every night. They don't demand to know your location at all times. They don't grab your wrist hard enough to leave marks when you try to leave a room. That's not concern. That's control. The lawyer tried a few more questions, attempting to poke holes in her story or catch her in contradictions. But Lena had lived the truth. She didn't need to remember a script or keep lies straight. She just answered honestly, and that honesty came through in every word. When she stepped down, she felt lighter somehow, despite having just relived some of the worst years of her life. She'd said it out loud, in an official setting, on the record. No more secrets. No more shame. Her lawyer then presented the evidence. All of it. Bank statements showing Bryce's sole control over finances. Text messages where he demanded to know her whereabouts and spending. Emails from Gloria criticizing everything from Lena's housekeeping to her appearance. Photos of Lena's wrist, time-stamped and dated, showing finger-shaped bruises after an argument. And then the recording. Your Honor, Lena's lawyer said, we'd like to play an audio recording that Ms. Whitlock made with her phone during a conversation with Gloria Whitlock, approximately 3 weeks before the lawsuit was filed. Gloria leaned forward, suddenly alert. I didn't consent to being recorded. Illinois is a one-party consent state, the lawyer said smoothly. Ms. Whitlock was part of the conversation and had every legal right to record it. The judge nodded. Proceed. The lawyer pressed play on a small speaker. The audio quality was decent, clear enough to understand every word. Gloria's voice came through first, tearful and pleading. Lena, please. He's so sick. The doctors say. I'm sorry, Gloria, but I can't help. That was Lena's voice, tired but firm. You could if you wanted to. You have money. I don't have $100,000. But you could get it. You could take a loan, or... No. A pause. Then Gloria's voice changed, became harder. Don't tell the doctors the truth about how sick he really is. What? Just say it's worse than it is. Make it sound more serious. They'll cover more if they think it's urgent. Gloria, that's insurance fraud. It's helping your family. Or I guess your ex-family, since you clearly don't care about any of us anymore. I'm hanging up now. Wait, Lena, listen to me. If you don't help us, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are. I'll tell everyone you abandoned him. I'll ruin you. Goodbye, Gloria. The recording ended. The courtroom was silent. Gloria sat frozen, her face white, her mouth slightly open. Bryce stared down at the table. Their lawyer shuffled papers, looking for something to say, some way to recover. There was nothing to say. The judge removed her glasses and looked at Gloria directly. Mrs. Whitlock, did you just admit on that recording to attempting insurance fraud and blackmail? Gloria stood, shaking. That's not. I didn't mean. She took that out of context. That's enough. The judge's voice was cold. I've heard enough from both sides. This case is dismissed with prejudice, which means it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order. Mrs. Gloria Whitlock, you are not to contact Ms. Lena Whitlock in any way. No calls, texts, letters, or third-party communication. If you violate this order, you will face criminal charges. Do you understand? This isn't fair, Gloria began. Do you understand? Yes, Gloria said, the word barely audible. The judge turned to Lena. Ms. Whitlock, I apologize that you had to go through this process. The claims against you are baseless and, frankly, malicious. You owe nothing. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. We're adjourned. The gavel came down. Lena stood. Her lawyer touched her arm, smiling. Well done. You were perfect up there. Thank you. For everything. She gathered her papers, her bag, preparing to leave. As she turned toward the exit, she caught sight of Gloria and Bryce still seated, neither of them moving. Gloria had her face in her hands. Bryce sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. For a moment, just a moment, Lena felt something like pity. Then she remembered the 8 years, the control, the fear, the slow erosion of herself until there was barely anything left. The pity evaporated. She walked past them without a word, through the courtroom doors, down the stairs, out into the bright afternoon. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. She stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply, letting the freedom of it wash over her. Behind her, she heard the doors open. Footsteps. She tensed, ready for one final confrontation. But it wasn't Gloria or Bryce. It was a woman who'd been sitting in the observer section. Someone Lena didn't recognize, maybe mid-40s with kind eyes. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to thank you." Lena blinked. "Thank me? I'm going through something similar. With my husband. I came today because my lawyer suggested I see how these cases go." The woman's voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "Watching you up there, listening to you tell your story, it helped. It helped me understand that I'm not crazy, that what I'm experiencing is real." Lena felt something crack open in her chest, not pain but recognition. "You're not crazy," she said firmly, "and you're not alone. If you need to leave, leave. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for it to make sense to anyone else." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." She walked away, and Lena watched her go, understanding something she hadn't quite grasped before. Her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to every woman who'd been controlled, diminished, told she was overreacting or ungrateful or cruel for wanting freedom. Telling the truth wasn't just about defending herself. It was about refusing to let the lie become the official narrative. Lena drove home slowly, taking back roads instead of the highway. She wasn't ready to rush back to her quiet rental house, to the ordinary evening that waited for her. She needed to sit with what had just happened, to let it settle in her bones. The lawsuit was over, dismissed. The judge had called it malicious, had issued a restraining order, had validated everything Lena had been afraid to say out loud for years. She'd won, not just the case, but something bigger. She'd won back her story. She pulled off the road near Carlisle Lake, the same spot where she'd sat in her car that morning she'd first walked out on Bryce. The water was dark gray now, reflecting the cloudy sky. A few boats moved across the surface, their wakes spreading in white lines behind them. The air smelled like water and distant rain and earth. Lena got out of the car and walked to the edge of the parking lot, where a wooden railing separated asphalt from rocky shore. She leaned against it, letting the wind pull at her hair, watching the lake move without direction, without permission, just flowing the way water flows. For 8 years, she'd needed permission for everything. Permission to leave the house. Permission to spend $10. Permission to have her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own life. She'd forgotten what it was like to exist without constantly checking over her shoulder, without measuring every word and action against someone else's impossible standards. And now she was free, not in some abstract, philosophical way. Free in the most practical, concrete sense. No one was monitoring her phone. No one was asking where she'd been. No one was going to show up at her door demanding explanations or money or obedience. She pulled out her phone and looked at the blocked contacts list. Bryce, Gloria, dozens of numbers from people who'd sent messages during the harassment campaign. She could unblock them now if she wanted. They were legally barred from contacting her. But she didn't want to. She liked the silence. A text came through from her lawyer. The restraining order is officially filed. If they contact you at all, call the police immediately. You did great today. Lena typed back, "Thank you for believing me." The response came quickly, Never doubted you for a second." Lena smiled and put her phone away. The wind picked up, colder now, promising rain. She should leave, should get home before the storm hit. But she stayed a few minutes longer, breathing in the clean smell of coming weather, feeling the way freedom felt. Not dramatic or triumphant, but quiet and sure, like finally setting down a weight you'd carried so long you'd forgotten it was heavy. When she finally drove home, the first drops of rain were hitting her windshield. By the time she pulled into her driveway, it was pouring hard, clean rain that drummed on the roof of her car and turned the road into a river. She sat and watched it for a moment, then grabbed her bag and ran for the front door, getting soaked in the 10 feet between car and porch. Inside, she kicked off her wet shoes, hung up her jacket, and stood in the small entryway of her rental house. The place was quiet, empty, hers. She made tea, actual tea this time, not coffee cut with too much milk and sugar to suit someone else's preferences. She carried it to the couch and sat down, tucking her feet under her, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. The sound was soothing, hypnotic, like nature applauding her survival. Over the next few hours, Lena let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The fear, the anger, the grief for the years she'd lost, for the woman she'd been before the marriage, for all the small deaths that accumulated when you lived under someone else's control. But she also felt something unexpected, pride. She'd done it. She'd left. She'd documented. She'd fought back when they tried to drag her down one more time. She'd stood in a courtroom and told the truth, even when it was terrifying, even when it meant exposing wounds she'd kept hidden for years. She'd won, not because a judge had agreed with her, though that helped. Not because Gloria and Bryce had been exposed, though that brought a certain satisfaction. She'd won because she'd refused to carry their version of the story. She'd refused to accept the guilt they tried to force on her, refused to pay the price they demanded for her freedom. She'd left, and she'd never gone back. Not emotionally, not financially, not in any way that mattered. That was the victory. As the rain continued outside, Lena found herself thinking about the woman on the courthouse steps, the one who'd thanked her. She wondered if that woman would leave, if she'd find the courage to walk away from whatever situation was crushing her. Lena hoped so. She hoped that woman would document everything, would trust herself, would refuse to believe the lies about who she was and what she deserved. But even if she didn't, even if she stayed or left and went back or took years to finally break free, that was her choice to make. Lena couldn't save anyone. She'd barely saved herself. All she could do was tell the truth and hope it helped someone else see their own truth more clearly. The rain slowed, stopped. The sun broke through clouds near the horizon, painting everything in gold and orange light. Lena finished her tea and stood up, walking to the window to look out at the lake. The water was calm now, reflecting the dramatic sky, beautiful in the aftermath of the storm. She thought about calling someone, her sister maybe, or Rita from the bookstore, who'd been quietly supportive through everything. But in the end, she didn't call anyone. She was learning to be comfortable with her own company, learning that being alone didn't mean being lonely. That night, Lena made herself dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and vegetables, and ate it slowly, tasting every bite. She washed the dishes and put them away. She took a long shower, letting hot water wash away the tension of the day. She put on comfortable clothes and sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars come out over the lake. Tomorrow she'd go to work. She'd shelve books and help customers and live her quiet life. But tonight, she just sat and breathed and let herself be free. Somewhere across town, Gloria and Bryce were probably discussing what had happened, probably creating new narratives to explain away their defeat. They'd tell themselves she'd lied, that the judge had been biased, that they were the real victims in all of this. Let them. Their version of reality had no power over her anymore. Lena pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and smiled into the darkness. She'd survived. She'd escaped. She'd defended herself. And now, finally, she could live. Not the life they'd wanted for her. Not the life she'd once thought she was supposed to want. Just her life. Messy and uncertain and entirely her own. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 6 months later, Lena sat in the same spot on her porch, watching early spring rain patter against the lake. The world had continued turning. The case had faded from immediate memory, though it still lived in her mind, not as trauma, but as evidence of her own strength. She'd heard through small-town channels that Bryce had moved away, taken a job in another state. Gloria had stayed, but she was no longer the social force she'd once been. People had heard about the lawsuit, about the recording, about what had really happened behind the closed doors of that perfect-seeming marriage. Gloria's reputation had crumbled, and with it her power. Lena felt no satisfaction in that. She'd never wanted to destroy them. She'd only wanted to be left alone. And she was. The restraining order remained in place. Her phone stayed silent. Her life belonged to her again. She'd been promoted at the bookstore, given more responsibility, more hours if she wanted them. She'd made friends, real friends, people who knew her story and supported her without trying to fix her or save her. She'd started running in the mornings, something she'd always wanted to do but had never had permission for in the marriage. Her life was full of small freedoms that added up to something significant. She still had bad days, days when she questioned herself, when the old voices of doubt crept in, when she wondered if she'd overreacted or been too harsh. But those days came less frequently now, and when they did, she knew how to handle them. She'd read about trauma and control and healing. She'd talked to a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse. She'd done the work of understanding that what happened to her wasn't her fault, that leaving wasn't cruel, that surviving wasn't something she needed to apologize for. She'd learned to trust herself again. A car pulled into the driveway. Lena turned, surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. But when the driver's door opened and she saw who it was, she smiled. Rita from the bookstore, carrying a bag of takeout and wearing a grin. "Thought you might want company," Rita called out. "And Thai food." "You thought right," Lena called back. They ate on the porch, talking about nothing important. New books coming to the store, Rita's daughter's college applications, the weather, plans for summer. Easy conversation. The kind Lena had forgotten was possible, where you could just talk without every word being weighed and measured and judged. After Rita left, Lena cleaned up and went inside. She paused in her living room, looking around at the space she'd created. Bookshelves she'd picked out herself. Furniture arranged the way she wanted it. Photos of places she'd visited, people she cared about. No pictures of the marriage. No remnants of that life except the lessons she'd learned. She thought about the woman from the courthouse steps. She'd never learned her name, never seen her again. But sometimes Lena imagined her free too, imagined her sitting in her own quiet space, breathing her own air, living her own life. She hoped that was true. She hoped everyone who'd ever felt trapped found their way out. And if her story, her truth, spoken clearly in a courtroom and carried forward by anyone who heard it, helped even one person leave, then everything she'd survived had been worth it. Lena turned off the lights and went to bed. The house settled around her, comfortable and safe. Through the window, she could see stars reflected in the lake, could hear the gentle sound of water against the shore. She closed her eyes and slept without fear, without waiting for footsteps or voices or demands. She slept free, and in the morning, she'd wake up free too. That was the victory. That was everything.